OceanGate's CEO ignored early warning signs.
Wanted fame. To fuel his ego, fame.
So why would OceanGate misrepresent the safety of Titan?
With the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber.
It's certainly a tragedy, and these guys broke the rules. It's that simple.
There was no way of knowing when Titan was going to fail, but it was a mathematical certainty that it would fail.
Oxygen is running out, maybe less than 12 hours left.
The morning of June 18th, 2023 was calm. The North Atlantic was running 3-meter swells. Good conditions for a dive. The Polar Prince, a converted research vessel, sat on the surface roughly 400 miles south of St. John's, Newfoundland. Somewhere beneath it, in water so deep that no sunlight had ever touched it, sat the wreck of the RMS Titanic. At approximately 9:45 in the morning, the Polar Prince sent a routine communication to the submersible descending toward it. No response came. They tried again. Standard protocol. Comms dropouts happened at depth. The crew had seen it before. They waited. They ran the checklist. They were methodical, and they were calm. But somewhere beneath the surface, at a depth where the water pressure is 380 times greater than the air at sea level, something had already happened. The United States Navy operates a classified hydrophone network across the Atlantic Ocean floor. It was built during the Cold War to detect Soviet submarines. On June 18th, 2023, that network registered an acoustic anomaly at approximately the time the Titan went silent. Navy analysts reviewed the data. They understood what it indicated. They shared it with the Coast Guard. They did not tell the world. For the next 4 days, the world watched. News channels ran around-the-clock coverage. Rescue aircraft circled. Ships converged from 3 countries. Experts appeared on television to calculate how much air remained on board. The world counted down the hours. 5 people were inside the Titan, and the answer, the only answer, was already lying on the ocean floor. The Titanic has been on the ocean floor for 111 years. It sank on the 15th of April, 1912, in these same waters. 1,500 people died. It remains the most famous maritime disaster in human history, not just because of its scale, but because of what it represented. The largest ship ever built, the supposedly unsinkable one, sunk on its maiden voyage. The hubris of it, the scale of the loss, the specific combination of wealth and catastrophe. These things lodged in the human imagination and never left. By the early 2020s, reaching the Titanic was no longer the exclusive territory of oceanographic institutions and naval research programs. A company called OceanGate Expeditions had made it available to anyone with $250,000 and a willingness to sign a waiver. OceanGate was founded in 2009 by a man named Stockton Rush. He was an engineer, a businessman, and a self-described innovator who believed that the deep ocean was the last great commercial frontier. His vision was not merely to explore, it was to make exploration scalable, to turn the deep sea into a place that paying customers could visit. In the same way that commercial spaceflight had begun opening the edges of the atmosphere, his flagship vessel was the Titan, 18 feet long, a cylindrical pressure hull built from carbon fiber, bonded at each end to titanium end caps. Capacity for 5 people. No windows. A single acrylic viewport, 21 inches in diameter, at the nose of the craft, facing forward. The inside was bare and functional. There was no luxury to speak of. You sat on the floor. You paid $250,000 to sit on the floor of a vessel the size of a transit van and descend, over roughly 2 hours, into total darkness. And a great many people found this extraordinary, because at the bottom of that descent, 3,800 meters below the surface, was the most storied wreck in history. On the morning of June 18th, 5 people boarded the Titan from the deck of the Polar Prince. The first was Paul-Henri Nargeolet, 77 years old, a decorated French Navy officer, a former commander of the French Navy's Deep Sea Intervention Group, a man who had spent 4 decades devoted to the Titanic specifically. He had made more than 35 dives to the wreck over the course of his career, more than any other living explorer. He had recovered artifacts from its debris field. He had mapped the progression of its decay. His colleagues called him Mr. Titanic, and he accepted the name because it was accurate. He loved that wreck the way scholars love primary sources, with discipline and with devotion. He was not a thrill seeker. He was the foremost expert on the site he was descending toward. The second and third were Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleman. Shahzada was 48 years old, British Pakistani by nationality, a businessman and philanthropist who served on the board of the SETI Institute, the organization dedicated to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. He was a man of genuine intellectual curiosity, and the Titanic dive was the kind of experience that appealed to it. Suleman was 19. He had just completed his first year at university in Scotland. His mother, Christine Dawood, was on the Polar Prince that morning, along with his sister Alina. They were there to watch him and his father dive. Christine Dawood would later say that Suleman went to support his father, that the dive wasn't something Suleman had been particularly enthusiastic about on his own. He went because his father wanted him there. The fourth person was Hamish Harding, 58 years old, British entrepreneur, aviation pioneer, Guinness World Record holder. He had previously descended to the deepest point on Earth, the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, aboard the limiting factor Submersible. He was a man for whom the edge of the possible was not a metaphor, but a destination.
At bottom, at bottom.
Yeah! Just reported in that we reached bottom.
The day before the dive, he posted on Instagram. He said the conditions were probably the best diving conditions ever seen at this time of year. He sounded delighted. The fifth was Stockton Rush, 61 years old, the CEO of OceanGate.
Hi, my name is Stockton Rush. I'm the CEO and founder of OceanGate. Let's take a look at Titan.
The man who conceived the Titan, funded it, oversaw its design, and piloted it on dives to the Titanic. He was not an observer of this operation. He was its architect in every sense. At approximately 8 o'clock that morning, the Titan was lowered into the water by crane. The hatch was sealed. 17 bolts, tightened by the crew of the Polar Prince from the outside. Once sealed, it could not be opened from within. The Titan began its descent. Here is a thing Stockton Rush said in a recorded interview. "I've broken some rules to make it. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me." He said this about the Titan. He said it proudly. The warnings about the Titan did not begin on the morning of June 18th. They began 5 years earlier. And they came not from outsiders, not from competitors, but from inside OceanGate itself. In 2018, a man named David Lockridge was OceanGate's Director of Marine Operations. He was a professional submersible pilot, decades of experience at depth, the kind of person you hire precisely because he knows what failure at 3,000 meters looks like. Lockridge reviewed the Titan's hull. The hull was made from carbon fiber, a material chosen for its lightweight and strength in certain conditions. But carbon fiber has a specific vulnerability that steel and titanium do not share. Every time you compress it to extreme depth and release it, the internal structure fatigues in ways that are invisible to the naked eye. The damage accumulates. You cannot see it until it is too late. Lockridge put this in writing. He recommended non-destructive testing, acoustic scanning between dives that could detect internal failure before it became catastrophic. OceanGate declined. Lockridge was fired. He sued. OceanGate countersued. The case settled out of court. David Lockridge signed a non-disclosure agreement and was legally silenced. That same year, 2018, the Marine Technology Society sent a letter to Stockton Rush. It was signed by dozens of oceanographic engineers, submersible designers, deep-sea researchers. Their concern was specific. The Titan had no independent classification, no third party, no Bureau Veritas, no DNV, no American Bureau of Shipping, had reviewed its design, inspected its construction, or certified it was fit to carry human beings to 4 kilometers of depth. Every other crewed submersible operating at those depths had undergone that process. The Titan had not, deliberately. Rush's response, in interviews, in published essays on the record, was that independent certification was innovation limiting. That critics were, in his words, gentlemen who are 50 years old who think they know everything. In one essay, he described the focus on maritime safety certification as and this is a direct quote, "frankly obscene." There is one more detail. The viewport at the nose of the Titan, the single acrylic window through which passengers looked out at the Titanic, had a rated operational depth of 1,300 meters. The Titanic sits at 3,800 meters. That is not a small margin of error. That is nearly 3 times the rated depth. The viewport manufacturer, Hydrospace, had stated this clearly in documentation provided to OceanGate. The company knew. Their answer, when this was raised, was that the viewport had performed adequately on previous dives. David Lockridge knew about the viewport. He was legally bound not to say so. On the surface of the Polar Prince, Christine Dawood waited. Her husband and her son were below her, somewhere in the dark. The descent to the Titanic took roughly 2 hours. She knew that. She was prepared for 2 hours of silence. What she was not prepared for was the silence that came after. The Polar Prince lost contact with the Titan at approximately 9:45 in the morning, 1 hour and 45 minutes into the dive. Standard procedure was to wait. Comms dropouts happened. The crew ran the checklist. They were calm. At 11 o'clock, they triggered the emergency alert. The search that followed was one of the largest and most visible maritime rescue operations in recent history. Ships and aircraft from 2 countries. The French research vessel L'Atalante, a specialized deep-water ROV flown in from New York. Sonar equipment, acoustic buoys, military assets. The world's media turned its full attention to a patch of the North Atlantic, and for 4 days it did not look away. Acoustic buoys detected intermittent banging sounds from beneath the surface.
That banging sounds detected in the North Atlantic might be coming from the 5-passenger Titan submersible.
The coverage was relentless. Experts calculated remaining air supply on live television. People tracked the countdown on their phones. Governments pledged more resources. The story felt like it was still moving, like there was still something to do, somewhere, that might change the outcome. Here is what was true. On June 18th, the day the Titan went silent, the US Navy's classified underwater acoustic network had registered an anomaly. This network was built during the Cold War to detect Soviet submarines. It covers the Atlantic Ocean floor. It does not miss things. The anomaly was consistent with a catastrophic implosion. An implosion is not an explosion. It is the opposite, total structural failure inward. At that depth, if the hull fails at any single point, the ocean does not give the contents time to register what is happening. The collapse is complete in milliseconds, faster than a nerve signal, faster than a thought. The Navy shared this data with the Coast Guard on June 18th. 4 days passed. On the 22nd of June, a remotely operated vehicle reached the seafloor. 488 meters from the bow of the Titanic, it found debris. The nose cone, the rear cover, sections of the hull. US Coast Guard Rear Admiral John Morgan confirmed it at a press conference that afternoon.
An ROV, or remote operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber.
The Titan was piloted with a Logitech gaming controller, not a modified version, not a professional-grade adaptation, a standard commercially available wireless game controller available from any electronics retailer for approximately $30. The passengers paid $250,000 each for their seat. The device controlling the submersible cost $30. OceanGate's position was that aviation had adopted electronic fly-by-wire interfaces, that the controller was a practical, modern solution. And there is an argument to be made for that in isolation. The interface itself is not necessarily the problem. What aviation had also adopted, though, mandatory certification, independent engineering review, regulatory oversight with legal authority to enforce standards, accident investigation bodies with the power to compel change. The Titan had none of these, not because they were unavailable, because the decision had been made, explicitly on the record, by its CEO that they were not necessary. That decision was possible because of where the Titan operated. In US territorial waters, the Coast Guard regulates crewed submersibles. But the Titan dove in international waters, outside US jurisdiction, outside Canadian jurisdiction, in a regulatory zone where no authority governed what an experimental crewed vessel needed to demonstrate before it could carry paying passengers to extreme depth. OceanGate did not stumble into this gap. They operated inside it. And when the people who understood what that meant tried to say so, David Lockridge, his formal internal safety report, his recommendation for hull testing, his termination, his lawsuit, his non-disclosure agreement, the mechanism that should have amplified those concerns instead buried them in a legal settlement. After the disaster, accounts emerged from other former OceanGate employees, some recorded before the implosion, others disclosed afterward, describing a culture in which safety concerns were not always welcomed, in which the development timeline moved faster than some staff considered wise, in which raising the wrong question could have the wrong consequences. These are, in part, allegations. OceanGate has not substantively responded to many of them. The company suspended all commercial operations in June 2023. The United States Coast Guard launched a formal investigation. As of this recording, it remains ongoing. No criminal charges have been filed. The families of Shahzada and Suleman Dawood filed a civil lawsuit against OceanGate. Other legal proceedings have followed. They continue. And here is the part that does not resolve. The regulatory gap that allowed the Titan to operate as it did, to carry 5 people to 4 kilometers of depth in an uncertified vessel with a viewport rated for 1/3 of that depth, piloted with a $30 controller in waters where no authority had jurisdiction. That gap is still there. No international standard has been written, no certification requirement has been imposed on crewed submersibles operating in deep international waters. The Marine Technology Society sent that letter in 2018. David Lockridge raised the internal alarm in 2018. The warnings were documented, filed, settled, and sealed. The Titan dived anyway, 5 years later, and no one, as of this recording, has been charged with anything. On the morning of June 18th, Christine Dawood stood on the deck of the Polar Prince and watched the Titan go into the water. She was there to see her husband and her son come back. Alina was with her. The US Navy detected the implosion acoustically on the same morning. They shared it with the Coast Guard. There are arguments for not releasing that data immediately. Acoustic anomalies require verification, certainty before announcement. The search would have continued regardless of what was disclosed. There are also arguments against it. Christine Dawood waited 4 days on that ship. The debris field tells the rest of the story. At that depth, the failure would have been instantaneous, faster than a nerve signal reaches the brain. Whatever happened in that fraction of a second was, in the most literal sense, beyond the capacity of anyone inside the Titan to perceive or understand. Physicists will tell you that is a mercy. It might be. What isn't a mercy is the 5 years before that morning, the letter, the fired engineer, the sealed lawsuit, the viewport taken to 3 times its rated depth. None of that was inevitable. Suleman Dawood was 19. He went because his father wanted him there. That detail doesn't leave you, not because it's the most tragic thing about this story, but because it's the most human. A teenager, on a ship he didn't choose, in a vessel no one had certified, descending into a gap in the law that everyone had been told about and no one had filled. The investigation continues. No charges have been filed. The gap is still there. And somewhere at the bottom of the North Atlantic, the ocean is keeping 5 people no court has yet accounted for. Every collapse was preventable.